Can you be my daddy for one night? The snow fell softly over Central Park, blanketing the winter evening in a gentle silence. The old lampposts glowed with warm golden light, casting long shadows across the pristine white pathways. It was Christmas Eve, and most families were already tucked inside their homes, gathered around fireplaces and decorated trees. But Marcus Bennett walked alone. He moved slowly through the park, his expensive wool coat dusted with snowflakes, a paper bag of groceries tucked under one arm. At 34, Marcus had built an empire from nothing. His tech company had made him wealthy beyond measure. He had penthouses, sports cars, and more money than he could spend in several lifetimes. Yet tonight, on Christmas Eve, he had no one to share it with. His footsteps crunched softly in the fresh snow. The park was nearly empty, just a few distant figures hurrying toward warmth and family. Marcus didn't hurry. He had nowhere urgent to be. His apartment would be dark and quiet, just like it was every other night. That's when he heard the small voice. "Excuse me, mister." Marcus stopped and turned. Standing beneath one of the glowing lampposts was a little girl. She looked about 6 years old, with blonde hair pulled back in a braid, wearing a gray sweater and a pink dress that seemed too thin for the cold weather. Her cheeks were rosy from the winter air, and her eyes were wide and hopeful. She was completely alone. Marcus glanced around quickly, searching for a parent or guardian, but the path was empty in both directions. He felt a flutter of concern in his chest. "Hello," he said gently, kneeling down to her level. "Are you lost? Where's your mom or dad?" The little girl twisted her hands together nervously. "My mommy is at the hospital," she said quietly. "She's sick. Mrs. Chen from next door brought me to see her today, but visiting hours ended and she had to take me back. We live just over there." She pointed vaguely toward the edge of the park. Marcus felt his heart tighten. "I see. Does Mrs. Chen know you're out here?" The girl shook her head, looking down at her shoes. "She fell asleep watching TV. I snuck out." Her lower lip trembled slightly. "Tomorrow is Christmas, and everyone at school has been talking about what their daddies are doing with them. Making cookies, wrapping presents, watching movies." She looked up at Marcus with eyes that held a sadness no child should know. "I don't have a daddy," she whispered. "He left before I was born. And mommy is too sick to come home for Christmas." A single tear rolled down her cheek. I know it's silly, but I thought maybe." She took a shaky breath. "Can you be my daddy for one night? Just for tonight, so I can know what it feels like. Just once." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stood frozen, staring at this brave little girl who had approached a stranger with the most heartbreaking request he'd ever heard. His throat felt tight, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. Then something shifted in his chest. A wall he'd built years ago began to crack. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Sophie," she said. "Sophie Miller." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly beneath him. He looked at her more carefully now, really looked at her. The shape of her eyes. The curve of her smile. That small dimple in her left cheek. His hands began to shake. "Sophie Miller," he repeated slowly. "Is your mother's name, is it Emma?" Sophie nodded, surprised. "Yes. Do you know my mommy?" Marcus sat down heavily on a nearby bench, his groceries forgotten beside him. His mind raced backward through time, to 8 years ago. To Emma, sweet, beautiful Emma, who had worked at his company in the early days. They had fallen in love quickly, intensely. But Marcus had been consumed by his growing business, working 20-hour days, canceling dates, always choosing work over her. One day, Emma had tried to tell him something important. But he'd been on his phone, distracted by a merger. He'd asked her to wait, to talk later. She'd left his apartment with tears in her eyes, and he'd let her go, thinking he'd fix things tomorrow. But she'd never called again. His texts went unanswered. When he'd finally gone to her apartment, she'd moved away. He'd told himself it was for the best. He had a company to build, after all. He'd never known she'd been trying to tell him she was pregnant. "Sophie," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "What hospital is your mom in?" "Mount Sinai," Sophie said. "The big one on 5th Avenue." Marcus pulled out his phone with trembling fingers. He made 3 calls in quick succession, first to his driver, then to his assistant, and finally to the hospital's director, whom he knew from various charity boards. Then he looked at Sophie and held out his hand. "Come with me," he said gently. "We're going to see your mom. And then we have a lot to talk about." Sophie's face lit up with confusion and hope. "But visiting hours are over." Marcus smiled. A real smile, the first genuine one in years. Not for us. Not tonight. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the hospital. Marcus had arranged everything. They walked through the quiet hallways, Sophie's small hand wrapped trustingly in his. When they reached Emma's room, Marcus paused outside the door. His heart pounded. Sophie squeezed his hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "Mommy's nice." Emma was awake, sitting up in bed, looking weak but alert. When she saw Sophie, relief flooded her face. But when she saw Marcus standing behind her daughter, she went completely still. "Marcus," she breathed. "Hi, Emma," he said quietly. I didn't know. I should have been there. I should have listened that day. But I was so focused on success that I missed the most important thing in my life." Tears streamed down Emma's face. "I tried to tell you. But you were always busy, and then I thought you didn't want this kind of life. I was an idiot," Marcus said simply. He knelt beside Sophie, putting his arm around her shoulders. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to fix that. Not just for tonight, for every night, forever." Sophie looked between them, understanding dawning in her bright eyes. "Wait, are you my real daddy?" Marcus looked at his daughter, and nodded, tears flowing freely now. "Yes, sweetheart, I am, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there before. But I promise you, I will be there from now on. If your mom will give me a chance." Emma reached out her hand, and Marcus took it. "One condition," Emma said softly. "No more choosing work over family." "Never again," Marcus vowed. "You two are my life now. Everything else is just details." Sophie threw her arms around Marcus's neck, and he held her tight, breathing in the reality of her, solid and real in his. Outside the window, snow continued to fall over the city. Christmas lights twinkled in the distance. And for the first time in years, Marcus Bennett felt like he'd finally come home.